Good evening. Welcome to the August 23rd Village Board Special Meeting. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. First, mayor's and trustees' announcements.
We don't need to do attendance for our special
You
session.
can do attendance as well. Thank you. I have not, I have not fully channeled Mary Ann Roberts, so I apologize. I will start again. Trustee Levin.
Here.
Trustee Quezada.
Present.
Trustee Codman.
Present.
Trustee Bazemore.
Here.
Mayor Garrity.
Present. Just mixing it up here.
You.
Okay.
Now, mayor's and trustees' announcements.
Sure. I have a couple. There's many exciting things to do in Austin, but there are a couple that are particularly on my list to remind folks about. This Friday evening, you can go down at 7:30, from 7:30 to 9 at the Ossining Boat and Canoe Club to hear a fascinating talk from village historian Dana White. And the focus of this Friday's discussion will be on the waterfront, and it's about Ossining's river history. And if you've seen the panels that are on the kiosk at Henry Gordine Park, that was the initial research for all of that Dana undertook with the support of some of the other historians in our community, but really focusing on Ossining's waterfront. And she has referred to this presentation as the director's cut of that research that she's now been continuing for the last several months. So it should be a really interesting discussion again at 7:30 at the Boat and Canoe Club this Friday. And it's free. Yes, thank you, Rika. The next day, go ahead and look through your house, pick up all the broken stuff that you've got, and bring it to the community center, because Green Ossining is running their second Repair Cafe. This is a program that they started earlier this year, and the village co-sponsors it with them by providing the space at the community center, and it's all volunteers. It also is free, so if you have they've done ceramics, sewing projects, you know, a light bulb, a lamp that needs to be rewired, right? Basic things that instead of throwing them away and adding more junk to our landfill, Green Ossining has decided they want to help you give new life to your broken and tattered items. And so please do bring it down to the community center. That starts at 11 a.m. this Saturday, August 26th, and it'll be running until 3 p.m. Any other community announcements? Other announcements? Because we have a really exciting agenda ahead of us, so I'm happy to get into it. Stuart Kahn.
Thank you,
I
Mayor.
don't know what your title is tonight.
Administrative reports. Interim Village Manager Paul Fraioli.
Thank you, Stuart. I just wanted to take this opportunity this evening for two reasons. One, based on the length of the agenda in the public session, the work session, and the executive session. This is no time for a long speech, so I'll keep it very brief and tell you that this last year and a half has been a learning experience for me. I appreciated the board's support and their patience, and I wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to publicly thank every single person in the administration, in the field, and in the offices for assisting me in these efforts for the past year and a half. It's been a great experience for me, and I'm very much looking forward, as well as I know everybody else is in the administration, to Debbie's arrival. So good luck to her, and thank you to the board for the opportunity.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for letting me follow that, Paul. Just a few brief announcements from Corporation Counsel. On tonight's special session agenda, in addition to the resolutions regarding our new village manager, there is a resolution with regard to an awning permit for the Hot Society Boutique at 175 Main Street. There is also a call for a public hearing regarding an amendment to the charter, section C2-8, which is really the residency requirements for the appointed officials within the village. This is a technical change. The board did approve an amendment previously with regard to this. When that amendment was put into place, some language was left out, So this corrective amendment will put that language back in, specifically relating to the residency requirements with regard to the clerk and the treasurer. Also, Resolution F tonight is a resolution approving the dissolution of Maple House Associates and the conveyance of the exemption to the new entity, which is Maple House Renewal. This is required by the folks who are providing the funding for the transfer, and we've been requested by council to provide this authorization to them. This is, as folks know, there was a previously agreed upon pilot agreement that relates to Maple House, and this document is needed in connection with the closing that hopefully will take place in September or at the latest early October. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, any organization announcements? Okay, hearing none. Are there any visitors who wish to speak with regard to any of the resolutions that are on tonight's agenda? Hearing none, we'll proceed. And Mayor, with the board's approval, I'm going to switch the order around a little bit of our resolutions.
Okay.
And we will start, in fact, first with what is listed as Resolution B, but we'll call it this evening now Resolution A. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining hereby authorizes the mayor, with the approval of the Board of Trustees, to execute an employment contract with Deborah A. McDonald at an initial salary of $170,000, said contract being subject to review by Corporation Counsel, and be it further resolved that Deborah A. McDonald is hereby appointed Village Manager of the Village of Ossining, effective September 1, 2017. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
On the board, would anyone like to comment on this resolution? Who wants to go first? Go right ahead, Deputy Mayor.
I jump right in. So, this was a pretty exhaustive process for the board, and we decided to involve others than the five of us to get involved. Paul was part of the interview process, as was Kevin and Stuart, and I think that it was important that we get others' perspectives, and we were certainly guided by their involvement and guided by their observations, and I'm very thankful for their participation. I think it really deepened the process of the search itself. I'm very excited about Debbie coming. She has just a great blend of private and public experience that I think is going to be. She's going to bring all those tools in her toolbox to our situation here, and some of the specific skills she has are around economic development, which obviously is a huge part of our agenda here in the village board. So I'm very excited to welcome Debbie and wish her all success going forward.
Sure. Year and a half. It has been really a pleasure and a learning experience for me as well. So I've always very much enjoyed your demeanor. There is a lot to this job. There is lots of personnel issues. There are lots of grenades that come in every day when you get up, which you have to deal with, unexpected, whether it's roads or fires or, 24 hours a day. So I know you've been in the village a long time, but I'm sure this was even more than you thought it would be. And I'm sure it's just expanded your knowledge about municipality. And for me as well, because I was relatively new when you started as well, so it's been great. So thank you on behalf of myself, and I'm sure, of course, the entire board. But we just loved working with you. And I know that you've said it from day one, that you're going to be very helpful to the new village manager as well. And Debbie, very excited that you're coming on board. I think I'm a big fan of professional managers, and I'm a big fan of people coming in with their own ideas. And to echo everything that John said, it was an exhaustive process. We didn't want to rush it. We saw a lot of different people. We interviewed a whole bunch of people. We did a national search. We did local. I feel really, really good. A couple of us were talking before the meeting started, feeling really great and wishing you all the best. And I really, really enjoyed the conversations we've had, and I think the community will see you the way we do and enjoy your presence here as well. So thank you for joining us very soon.
All right, who's up?
So Rika, you kind of stole my line.
Should have gone first, baby.
No, I should have. But I do definitely want to thank Paul for helping us out in this transitional point of a year and a half. You know, we as a board and with your guidance and your help and Stuart, we have done a lot of projects that I think we all wanted to accomplish for a very long time. This is not like a farewell because you're not going anywhere. You're still going to be our village engineer. So you're still going to be working for the village of Austin, so which is, you know, an asset that, you know, just an additional skill that you're going to have under your sleeve, so to speak, with all the experience that you have gained in here and the knowledge. So I want to thank you for all the work that you have done here and for many, many more years to come that you still be with us, helping our community. And yes, I agree with what Rika and John have said. It's a very long process, very difficult in some instance. But I think we as a board, you know, we learn a lot from different people, and I think we all have a little bit of what we wanted with Debbie. I think she has a lot of experience. I think that's something that will be very useful for our community and going forward to move some of the future projects that are coming along now. So I want to thank you for coming in to our community and give us some of that experience and the knowledge you have. So thank you for everything that you're going to be bringing to our community here. So, and I want to thank the board that I think this interview process was totally different from what we have previously. I want to thank our Chief of Police, Kevin. It was part of that interview. It's a lot of feedback that he gave us in some instance. Stuart, the same thing, and definitely Paul. It was a different perspective of the three of you that are working here every day, full time, more 24/7, so to speak, than us now being in the office, so to speak, every day. So I want to thank everybody that was part of this interview process. I think we all did a great job, so thank you.
Paul, I want to thank you, particularly over the last year and a half, when dealing with our big projects or monumental tasks. You've always managed to put the village first, and I definitely do appreciate that. And to Debbie, I'm very optimistic about the work that you're going to do here in Asane, and I'm glad that you have decided to take on this position.
So Paul, just to remind anybody who doesn't follow us every single week, when Paul stepped up to this role, he made it very clear that he wasn't sure if this is going to be long-term, and we said, let's see how it goes, and we were all open to seeing how it goes. And it was Paul who came to us this spring and said, you know, I really want to just focus on the big projects that we have ahead in the village engineer's role, and please start looking for someone. And it has been a very interesting process. And Paul, I'm sure that in the last year and a half, as you stepped into this position, you have gained a different perspective on the village and on your colleagues, and it'll be very interesting to see how, when you're full-time up at DPW, particularly with the larger than ever projects that you're going to be leading, how your experience in this seat will inform your work going forward in that. So I'm excited for all that you will be doing for the village going forward. Thank you. So Debbie, I think it'll be really interesting to see the community's reaction to you as they get to know you, because after we do the vote, I'd like to invite you up so that everyone can hear you and you can say a couple of words. Debbie is so joyful and happy in all of her communications. And I think it will be very disarming to people. And I have also now had enough conversations with her that I think of her as a velvet hammer. And so I'm really looking forward to how incredibly effective you will be in moving forward some of the exciting projects in our community. And Debbie's fresh perspective that she brings here is not just because she hasn't been in Ossining government for ever before, but also she's not from Westchester. She's not lived in Westchester. She's not worked in Westchester. She's her experience is in upstate New York and in Ohio. And my experience as a young woman, I went to college and lived out in Ohio for a while, so I appreciate being reminded of my time there. And during the interview process, Trustee Codman and I had an opportunity to speak with some of Debbie's past colleagues who could not be more glowing in all that she accomplished in her past roles, and we look forward to seeing that kind of success here for us in Ossining. Everyone will get to hear her voice in a couple of words in a couple of minutes, but more importantly, if anybody who would like to meet the manager, we've scheduled a couple of community events where Debbie will just be out and about in the community, and she'll look forward to shaking your hand and getting to meet you and hearing your thoughts on Ossining. So on her official first day is Friday, September 1st, so give her a week. And then the following Friday, September 8th, hopefully she'll have figured everything out, and she'll be down at First Village Coffee at 12 noon for a couple of hours. So between 12 and 2 on Friday, September 8th, go ahead and meet Debbie in person. Introduce yourself. Tell her what you love about Ossining, what you hope she can bring to Ossining, and just say hello and make her feel welcome. So that's September 8th. That's a Friday from 12 to 2. Thank you to our friends at First Village Coffee for helping coordinate that opportunity. And then just another week later, on Saturday, September 16th, our friends at the Ossining Farmers Market, Down to Earth Markets, will be welcoming Debbie, and she'll be there bright and early, 8:30, as people start arriving, because there are people who show up first thing, 8:30 on Saturday morning, and they'll be excited to meet you, and she'll stick around until about noon. So that'll be a long day, lots of chances to get to shake Debbie's hand and tell her why you love the farmers market and downtown Ossining, and welcome her here to Ossining, and I'm sure she'll be excited to meet all of you. So that's September 8th and September 16th, and we will post that information up on the Village website. Without further ado, I think we have a motion on the table.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
So that's unanimous. Is there, is the contract available for me to officially sign? Do we have it with us?
Go upstairs and I will get it for you.
Well, why don't we, meanwhile, why don't we
We will
invite
have a
Debbie to
I
make a
think, yeah.
comment or two? Yes, Paul? Oh, are you going to run up? Oh, okay. Oh, no, she can just, we
Let's
decided
sit
she
right
could
here.
sit here
There's a chair.
next to Jamie where there's an empty chair. You don't have to hop up. You're still with us for tonight, aren't you, Paul? You're not going to get out of this one. We got one more meeting with you. No, you can come and sit at the table, but
Yeah, there's a
you'll sit at the
microphone right
north
there.
end of the table for one night.
Just need to speak into the mic, otherwise it doesn't get recorded.
Oh, be careful. That's the chair that tricks
Oh.
people.
Do we lose
Wow,
people on
that
this
was
chair?
so mean
This
that
is
we
the
let her.
test. This is the first test.
Don't
if
lean
I
back.
can
Just
sit
don't
in
lean
the
back.
chair.
You're good.
Well, thank you all very much for this wonderful welcome and this great opportunity, and I really appreciate all of you giving me this chance. I look forward to taking the experience that I've learned in other places and bringing it here and getting to know everyone. Stuart, thank you so much for all that you did to help me through the interviewing process and to get me through things. Jamie, I look forward to working with you a lot. We're going to have a lot of fun. And Paul, thank you so much for reaching out to me and giving me some insight into what some of the fun things are that are going on here in the village and what the challenges are. And I look forward to working with you directly and all the rest of the staff. And I can say that Paul has given me just glowing reviews about all the different departments. And so I'm so excited about getting to know all the employees here and an opportunity to work with them. And I'm looking forward to it. I have been looking for a home here. I come down once a week and look at 4 more houses, so I'm sure something will pop up soon. And I do have an opportunity to sell my condo up in Poughkeepsie, so things are transitioning well, so I think that it's really meant to be, and I look forward to working with all of you. I have a lot of ideas on what I think all of you want, and I'm looking forward to leading discussions with you as well on where we want to go. And I can't wait to meet the community, because if all of you are a reflection of this community, I just can't imagine just how wonderful everybody is around here, and just an opportunity to get to know them and to hear their ideas, because I want everybody to know that I'm very big into listening, and I want to hear what they have to say and figure out how we can transition their ideas into making Ossining the place that they want to be in the future, and helping to lead that. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're very excited.
Thanks.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. All right.
Next resolution before the board. Resolved that pursuant to the Charter of the Village of Ossining, Section C2-8, the village manager may reside any place within Westchester County, and be it further resolved that pursuant to the Charter of the Village of Ossining, Section C2-8, the Corporation Council may reside any place within the town of Ossining. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
On the board, Mr. Whatever your title is tonight.
Mr. Clerk, I think would be appropriate.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next, we'll go back to what was originally listed as Resolution A. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining hereby approves the voucher detail report dated August 23, 2017, in the amount of $1,200,005.16. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
On the board, Mr. Clerk?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm going to abstain. I don't think I was here for that one.
It's actually
Well, it's a voucher detail report.
Oh, it's
so
a
you
voucher.
can vote on a budget item, even
Okay.
if you didn't see it, or
Okay,
if you wish. It's up
That's an
to
aye.
you.
that's an aye.
Aye, aye.
A.
Okay. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining hereby approves the application of Edith Santiago Sutera on behalf of Hot Society Boutique, located at 175 Main Street, Section 89.19, Block 4, Lot 21.1, for an awning in accordance with the application dated June 2, 2017, subject to approval of a certificate of appropriateness by the Historic Preservation Commission pursuant to Section 270-25 of the Village Code. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I'm just curious, do you know if it's been reviewed by the
I-
Historic Preservation
I
Commission?
can advise the answer is yes, and in fact, at their next meeting, they will sign the resolution. They in fact approved it the last one, they just have to, they won't formally sign the resolution until their meeting in early September.
Was there not a quorum at the one that they reviewed it?
Well, but they needed to sign, but the resolution can't be signed until the following meeting when they do the minutes. So that's how it works, so.
Okay. Is
We'll-
that what you were
we'll do
about
it
to
that
say,
way.
Lynn? Lynn was happy, okay, great, okay, thank you.
Their meeting is the Tuesday after Labor Day.
We shouldn't hold it
Then
up.
I'll skip ahead to, all those in favor?
Okay. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining hereby calls for a public hearing to take place at the Birdsall-Fagan Police Court Facility, 86-88 Spring Street, Ossining, New York, on September 6, 2017, at 7:30 p.m., or as soon thereafter as the matter may be heard, to consider Local Law 6-2017, titled Amendment to the Charter of the Village of Ossining, Article 2, Section C2-8, which local law would amend the charter relating to residency requirements for the clerk and treasurer. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 I'm sorry, I didn't offer, did anybody want to comment on that? You can still comment before we move forward. Okay. Sir?
Thank you. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining, pursuant to New York Private Housing Finance Law, Section 123, subsection 4, consents to the voluntary dissolution of Maple House Associates LP, the current owner of the property located at 15 Maple Place, Ossining, New York, SBL 89.19-4-53, as a redevelopment company pursuant to Article 5 of the New York Private Housing Finance Law, and upon such voluntary dissolution, Maple House Associates LP shall continue to exist as a limited partnership not subject to Article 5 of the New York Private Housing Finance Law, and shall have no obligations thereunder, including but not limited to payment of any surplus from the sale of the property or from the funds in the treasury of Maple House Associates LP. And be it further resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining, pursuant to New York Private Housing Finance Law, Section 125, approves the termination of the partial exemption of the above-described property, which termination shall become effective 1 day preceding the conveyance of the property from Maple House Associates LP to Maple House Renewal LLC. And be it further resolved that if the conveyance of the property from Maple House Associates LP to Maple House Renewal LLC does not occur, either 1, within 1 day following the termination of the exemption, or 2, on the same day as the voluntary dissolution of Maple House Associates LP as a redevelopment company, subject to Article 5 of the New York Private Housing Finance Law, then the consent and approval by the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining recited above shall be null and void, and both the exemption and the obligations of Maple House Associates LP to remain a redevelopment company pursuant to Article 5 of the New York Private Housing Finance Law shall be reinstated as though such exemption and obligations had never been interrupted. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Yeah, on the board.
Yeah, so it would appear that we want this transfer to take place, but we're also saying that if it doesn't happen within this very 24-hour period, that it's not going to happen. So what there's some protections that you're putting in here.
That's correct. I have already received the draft of the mortgage, draft of the pilot. The dissolution documents have already been seen by me, and they've been approved. So this is everything's going to happen at the closing, effectively, so that there will be the one LP will go out of business, and Maple House Renewal will effectively take it over. They'll be the entity that will have the pilot agreement, and they will the ones who will be paying pursuant to the pilot agreement. So that's what's done. And because this is, I believe, in part Fannie Mae funded, they're the ones who are specifically requesting this resolution.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Is there any continuing business for the board?
Only if we have the contract. Is it down here? Otherwise, we can do it during a recess.
We can do it during a recess, because I'll just run
Perfect.
up and get that.
Thank you.
Do we have any new business for the board?
No, just the whole work
Okay.
session agenda ahead.
Any visitor recognition?
Would anybody else like to comment on anything at all? Okay.
And we can have a motion to adjourn to work session?
Yes, but I'd like to have a 5-minute recess in between so we can take
Fine.
care of that and shake hands with our friend Debbie, who is going, she's actually on vacation this week and just came in for this exciting vote. And Debbie, you will be joining us next Wednesday, which is actually 2 days before you officially start, but you'll be joining us for the work session. We'll look forward to that.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, 5-minute recess, and then we'll be back.
I'll be
to
right
work
back.
session. Thank you, sir.
Proceed.
Excellent. All right. So, Paul, here we go. Yeah, now you get to do your thing.
Thank you, Mayor. Our first agenda item tonight is exciting because it's the first time for the group of BST and Company to present their audit results for the year 2016. So here tonight to present is our treasurer, Thomas Warren, and with him is Brendan Kennedy of BST and Company. So I'll turn the mic over now to, I guess, Brendan.
Hey, good evening, everyone. So, appreciate you having us here in this nice, cool room to present. And I got to say, first off, I did also get a little slack from Tom on my presentation. The picture you see up there is from BSD's stock photo, and he did indicate that it didn't look very village-like. And I said, well, maybe it's a future Ossining building. But so we'll do better in the future. We'll get a more village-oriented picture for you guys as we present. So the document I'm going to work off is this presentation you have in front of you. And what I'm going to do, because we did a number of things as part of our services for the village, work off this, and if there are any specific questions about the actual reports we've issued, then we can go to those documents as well. Okay? So when you flip past the cover, you get to the table of contents, and this is just an outline of the things I thought I would talk to you about. I like to focus on the audit and the audit results. If there's any financial statement questions, we can talk about those as well. And of course, we have Tom here to chime in on those as well here. Okay, so once you get past the table of contents, just to reaffirm the scope of services. So we did a number of things for you here. We do a financial statement audit, which is an auditor's report on your financial statements. That includes 6 opinion units. So you have your governmental wide, which is your full accrual, and then you have your major funds, and then your aggregated non-major funds. So when we do an audit of your financial statements, there's actually 6 opinions, or 6 miniature entities that we give opinions on as part of the village's financial statement audit. We also do a federal single audit that covered one program, and that's your Section 8 program. And with that comes a report on controls and compliance. BSD also did a state single audit, which is on your DOT funds, your CHIP funding. This, I believe, was new to the village, and you didn't necessarily ask for it, but it's our understanding as a firm that whenever you receive federal funding and you receive state funding on your CHIPs, over $100,000, we also do a state single audit. This was included at no cost to the village, and this was not part of the original scope of services. This is a supplemental report that we issued to you folks. Okay? And finally, we do our report on internal control and compliance over financial reporting. This is a report that's required in accordance with government auditing standards. I do like to stress that this is a report, not necessarily an opinion on your internal controls, but to the extent there were any significant issues, we would communicate to you those as part of this report. Okay? So the next several pages here are just an executive summary of the different audits that we did for the village. We have issued an unmodified opinion on each opinion unit. That is the highest level of assurance that we can give you, the board, that the financial statements are free of material error. We also issue an unmodified opinion in relation to on your supplementary information. So in addition to the basic financial statements that are included in the document, we have a number of supplementary schedules that we have elected to include, and we do audit work over those, and we are giving you an unmodified opinion on those as well. This is something that it actually kind of shocked me. I had to re-examine my notes and re-examine the audit file. We had no recorded audit adjustments and no unrecorded audit adjustments as a result of the audit. Every audit adjustment was a PBC entry, or what I call a prepared by client entry, that Tom had given us at some point during the audit. That is very uncommon to have 0 audit adjustments as a result of an audit. So I myself didn't think so, and I went back and checked, and true to form, it was a clean audit through and through the, so the village should be very proud of that right there. There were 2 accounting standards that we adopted as part of this year's audit. GASB 72 dealt with fair value measurements. This is a disclosure-only standard. It really mirrors the FASB, the commercial standards, in terms of fair value disclosures. I don't think it significantly impacted us because we don't have a lot of investments or things that would require disclosure. In GASB 77, this is disclosed in footnote 10. This deals with tax abatement disclosures. I heard you folks talking about pilot agreements. This is a formal disclosure about the amount of taxes abated as part of those agreements or others that the village or any other municipality that the village has some taxing consequence with, and the amount of taxes that would be abated as part of that. It's a disclosure only, and it's included in footnote 10 to the financial statements, and that is new to the 2016 financial statements.
Remind me what GASB stands for?
GASB is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Those are the standards that we have to follow to comply with US GAAP. So there were no audit adjustments and no unrecorded audit adjustments, so naturally we did not have any internal control deficiencies that we would report to you or the board. We found that the controls we did test, which we'll talk about a little bit later, were in place and operating effectively. And we did identify 2 enhancements to internal control or operations that we will present to you. These will be included in the management letter, and they deal with purchase orders and out-of-title pay. There's a separate management letter that we will issue to you. It's in draft form right now, and that will be available for your review. Okay, and these are items that we didn't feel rose to the level of a control deficiency, but they're items for your consideration that we do believe will enhance your internal controls. Okay, so a separate letter to be issued very shortly. Okay? So far, positive news.
So far.
Well, come on, let me get through.
Fewer
Ba-
bullets on this page.
Yes, there is, that's right. Well, the financial audit, if we were to divvy the time, the financial audit is where the bulk of our time goes. You do have a relatively complex federal single audit program. I believe it's your only federal funds. It's the Section 8 Housing Choice Vouchers. So although it's a very popular program, a very common program to audit, there's still a lot that goes into it, okay? And your program expenditures under that were $3.3 million. And again, being our first year with the village, we were somewhat impressed with the condition of records that were maintained by your group over there. That's about as close as we can come as auditors to giving a compliment. That's just about as nice as I get. So very well organized, very good records, and obviously we did not have any issues as part of that. There's a clean audit opinion on your compliance and also a clean opinion on your internal controls over compliance as it relates to this specific program. Okay, this is new, and I felt compelled to give a little more clarity here. So there's really not more to talk about per se, but I just wanted you to understand this seems to be a difference between your predecessor firm and the way BST approaches these programs. There is a state single audit requirement, and there are draft guidelines that were issued by DOT. These guidelines were issued in 2002, and DOT, your state government, has not gone and yet finalized them. However, we still use these draft guidance as our basis for doing the state single audit. And we do a state single audit when you have a federal single audit and $100,000 in state DOT money. So the audit is relatively non-complex because, as you can see, it's only $346,000, and that's really 2 invoices that make up that amount. So auditing those invoices was done in conjunction with our other expenditure testing. We've obviously validated your internal controls as it relates to those disbursements, and we felt they complied with the requirements of the state DOT rules and regulations. So there is a separate single audit report that covers your compliance with New York State DOT funds received. Okay? What I've done here is just outline some of the major areas that BST focused on as part of the audit. We were here for a couple of weeks, and we were here a week in the January timeframe to do some planning procedures and make sure we document our understanding of major processes. My philosophy at a governmental organization, I really like to beat up the procurement process. I get very sensitive about the money going out the door. I like to see that there are internal controls over your procurement process and expenditures. I like to make sure you're adhering to your bidding processes, whether you're buying off state, county, et cetera contracts, or you're following the bid rules and regulations that you're supposed to. And obviously we determine that to be compliant with not only your own policies, but state law. We also consider fraud in the conduct of our audit, and there's a couple ways we do that. Management's ability to override internal controls, if that so exists. So we do look at journal entries, we look at cash receipts and processes like that, and consider those as part of your financial reporting processes. And again, at this point, we don't have anything to report to you. Cash and collateralization is a lot of the audit. You have several bank accounts and that cover multiple funds. So we go through all your cash reconciliations, confirm balances. We're on the lookout for any abnormal reconciling items or anything that may seem suspicious, and make sure those balances all tie to your general ledger systems. Similarly, we go through your payroll process. Obviously, we have a large budget here at the Village of Ossining. A good chunk of that's payroll, okay? And so one of the things we did do, and we can talk about this a little later, is we selected some people that were receiving payroll during the year, and we kind of focused on this as we were tying back labor rates or pay rates. We noticed out-of-title pay. And in each instance when we noticed there was out-of-title pay, there was an approval by a department manager, but we were unable to validate why exactly, the reason behind why that person received out-of-title pay. So someone signed off saying it was okay, but we still don't know why, whether it was someone being out on personal leave or medical leave or some other extraneous issue. So we didn't necessarily felt like that would be a deficiency over the balance, but we do make a recommendation in our management letter that those controls over out-of-title pay perhaps be beefed up. And you'll see in that letter, once you have that, the exact recommendation we make to you as part of that. So just an area we felt like you might be able to tighten a little bit. Okay? There's a number of significant accounting estimates. These take up a large chunk of your balance sheet. OPEB is the acronym for Other Post-Employment Benefits. Those are your estimated retiree health insurance costs. It's a big number. In New York State, you cannot fund it, so it just sits as a big nut in our government-wide financial statements. Last year, you adopted GASB 68 and 71, which dealt with the net pension liability. And really what we're doing is reporting our proportionate share of the state retirement system pension obligation. And it just added another 3 pages of footnote disclosures and some extra numbers in our financial statements. All that data is published by the state comptroller, and really we're just taking that and putting it into our statements. We do look at depreciation expense. Every time we add an asset, we'd like to validate the useful life and make sure that's calculating correctly. And we're also self-insured as it relates to workers' compensation. We go through those accounting estimates and make sure they're appropriate. And finally, obviously, an area of audit focus that we talked about before really deals with your single audits, your federal and state. That's a big chunk of our audit and a big chunk of our focus. So page 8, I won't read this in detail, but this just gives you a sense of some of the volume and some of the other procedures we did as part of the audit. We did look at a significant number of disbursements. We did look at some employees, confirmed balances. We look at capital asset additions. We make sure your disbursements are appropriately cut off. So those liabilities that relate to your 12/31 period, making sure those are complete and accurate. And also go through your cash receipt processes and making sure that we have some level of controls. We did validate substantively some of those, and in other places did some analytical procedures. I won't beat this up. This is just some of the detail of the procedures we did over your major program. So we did look at 25 program participants. These are some of the compliance areas that we focused on as part of the audit. These are really spelled out by the federal government as to exactly what we're going to do. And we found in all instances with your 25 program participants and the other compliance areas, we found your documentation to support compliance with those federal requirements. So, positive news. Very quickly, and we already talked about this, this is your state single audit. There was just 2 expenditures. We tested these as part of our expenditure test work, and we looked at the requests for payments. They were allowable, they were adequately supported, and again, you received a clean opinion on your compliance with state requirements. I do like to throw in a little analysis about your overall performance, just so you can get a sense of where you stand. This is just simply a trend analysis of your general fund, and I use the term unrestricted, which includes your unassigned and assigned fund balances. And me, as an external reader of your statements, this tells me you're in pretty good financial condition. 31%, or even as low as 18 where you were in 2003, is pretty strong. Anywhere from 15 to 25 is considered strong by the state comptroller. We're obviously trending positively in terms of accumulating our fund resources. And just one suggestion, there's a number of legal reserves you can create under general municipal law. There's all kinds of guidance, and if you need it, I can give it to you. Once you start creeping over 25% is where you can find the state comptroller criticizing you for having too much money, believe it or not. They're not going to tell you you have it just right. They'll tell you when you don't have enough, and then they're going to criticize you for having too much. So really what my suggestion is, and I'm sure you folks are doing this, have a plan for any resources you're accumulating in fund balance, and I'm sure you do. So they like to see, the state likes to see that legally reserved under one of their general municipal reserves. The water fund is a little harder to analyze. These numbers don't tell the whole picture because we got a couple things going on. On face value, it looks like we have a really high fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. However, some of that fund balance relates to accounts receivable. Accounts receivable take time to convert to cash, and that may be a perfect justification for accumulating a little bit higher fund balance than you say would in your general fund. The other thing that we have going on is I believe we have a relatively large water filtration plant project on the horizon that we're thinking about. So accumulating resources for that accumulating resources for that might not be a bad idea. So given those two things, I think you have a pretty good justification for the balance you've accumulated here in your water fund. Again, nice problems to have, adequate fund balance and resources on hand to meet your current needs. Okay? Just a few other notes. Your workers' comp fund, which is your self-insurance fund, you have adequate reserves in there. Similarly with your sewer fund and your special purpose fund, they look financially stable. And this is not uncommon. Your Section 8, which is your fund that administers that program we were talking about earlier, that's kind of a break-even design fund, and I think you're going to find that. There's not a lot of resources accumulated in that fund, and there typically isn't. But that program is reliant in what appears to be a transfer from your general fund to break even. So just wanted to make sure that's pointed out as part of this analysis. Okay. So auditors are required to make certain communications. Some of them are in here, and some of those are in a separate letter, which I'll issue to you. I like to kind of go through some of them here just so you get a sense. I found the personnel we dealt with to be friendly, organized, and knowledgeable. The village's records were in good order. The overall financial health of the village appears strong. We felt your accounting policies and practices were appropriate. Other than the adoption of those accounting standards, which were disclosures only, there was no significant changes, no significant or unusual transactions. As mentioned, we went through your estimates. We even considered management bias in the development of those estimates, and we deemed them to be reasonable. We didn't identify any materially deficient processes or controls that would impact both your compliance with federal, state laws, or financial reporting for that matter. We encountered no significant difficulties, and we'll add that the finance department, as well as the rest of the departments we dealt with, were cooperative in the conduct of our audit. So we really appreciate it. It was our first year as your auditors. My goal going forward would be to do this meeting 2 months earlier than we are right now. I know we have a history of getting this done in June, and I'd certainly like to adhere to that. I think now that we have a year under our belt, we can certainly move up the timeline and get this done quicker for you folks. So those were my prepared remarks. If you have questions, let them rip. If you think of questions tomorrow, the next day, or the next week, Tom has my information, and I'm always ready and willing to speak with you fine folks.
Imagine there are questions and comments, right? I'll bet. No shoes dropped, though, so that was good.
No.
If you were, not a question, but if this was a class, this would be an A for the finance department, based.
I'm a hard grader.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. An A+. I mean, it seems like.
I think the results speak for themselves. Like I said, I was a little shocked that we didn't catch Tom on one thing.
No.
And you can tell we went through a number of transactions. It wasn't for lack of effort. As I think at some point Tom was ready to throw us out the window because we were requesting so much documentation on different things. So we were trying, and we went through a lot of different areas, and I think the results speak for themselves. So
Thank you.
I'd just like to make a couple comments. I know that I'd been in touch with Tom, as the audit was moving along, and I'm glad that at the end of your presentation you indicated that you would want to move up the completion of the audit. This is very important to us, as you well know. We have to make sure that we get our financials done so that when we go out to the market and borrow, that we have proper documentation to show the lenders and the financial institutions. So getting it done sooner would be very important to me. So I hope you will take care of that. That
we
would
have
be
our
great.
commitment.
You mentioned about the reserves and and talking about the extra monies, and it's no mystery to us that we sort of knew that as we got to the end of last year and into January and February of this year that you know, we were going to have a pretty significant fund balance. I am interested to understand about these set-asides, and obviously, you know, once you get too much money, like you said, they don't want you to have too much, but you can't have too little.
Yeah, I know.
So I would like to get educated on and understand that and the implications of that, and you know, how that would be viewed by state and state regulators and et cetera. But otherwise, I'm you know, the only complaint that Tom made to me was that you didn't get done as quickly as he would have liked. So let's hope we can do that. I'm glad you feel comfortable with Tom's work and the quality of it. And obviously you tried really hard to find something wrong, and you couldn't do that. So
always next
good
year.
for you and good for Tom.
Yeah, there's, just going back to your first point about the reserves, there's a book published by the state comptroller that goes through the different legal reserves. We can certainly get a copy of that and have that passed along through Tom to you for your perusal. It's probably a 20-page book, and it just goes through the different kinds of legal reserves. And then after that, we could have a subsequent conversation about this Goldilocks zone. It would, you know, it's just one of the things that OSC, as they're going through and they're doing their audits, sometimes they have comments about accumulated fund balance and what's your plan for that. So whether it's a reserved or we have a plan for it, I think that's the key for the
Is
village.
it like if you encumber the funds, does that make a, like,
Well,
if you set it aside for certain purposes, and does that take it out of the equation, or is it?
It could, if you generate a reserve under the general municipal law, and we'd have to look at the exact verbiage you need, but essentially it would come down to passing a resolution, and then you could set up a general capital reserve, which would leave it fairly flexible. You could then use those funds for a truck or a paving project or whatever it is you want. There's tax stabilization reserves, there's employee benefit reserves. There's probably about 10 or so different ones that municipalities use. And it's a matter of passing a resolution, and then when it's time to use that money, there's certain rules and things that you have to follow when you want to do that. And that kind of takes it out of your unrestricted and moves it up within that fund balance classification to restricted. It's really just moving the money around. It's not spending it.
Before we move on, I just want to clarify, if we were to put something in, take it out of the unrestricted category and put it into a reserve fund, but then we say, you know what, we thought we were going to do this big project, so we put all this money in the reserve. Instead, we're going to take it out and we're going to put it someplace else. How, undoing that, how much of a process is
Yeah,
that?
we'd have to look at whether you could reclassify that reserve. That's a good question. And that's why some people don't like the reserves.
Understood.
Usually it's when you know you're going to do something. Say we're going to go build a new firehouse, or we're going to go build a new, and you start setting aside money for that specific project. Or you just set up a general capital reserve.
Manning. Trustee Quesada.
Well, thank you for the presentation. We always kind of, I look kind of forward almost every year to see someone else kind of go back and look at what Tom has been working on it. And you're not the first one to actually come in and say that you couldn't find anything wrong with what Tom has been working on it for the village of Austin. So I want to thank Tom for all the hard work and everybody in his office that does the impossible sometimes for our community. You know, it's just interesting to see the numbers, and I'll be interested to read some of the laws in the book. So if you can,
Yep.
you know, if there's a link that you can send us,
Sure.
or the book, you know, we kind of prefer a link so we can look at it on the computer if that's possible.
Yep.
If not, a hard copy.
PDF, we could probably do
That'd be
just
great.
as easily.
Yeah, that would be great if you can do that. You know, at least I'm interested. It seems like some of us may be interested to read, and you know, just as a reading material, I guess. You know, and then we'll get the advice from Tom and see what makes sense and some of the projects that we're working on it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Trustee Basemore, you didn't have any questions or comments? Trustee Levin, did you have further comments? Well, I just want to say, Brendan, welcome to Ossining. With all of the excitement we had with our special session. I didn't get a chance to speak with you before you started speaking with us, and so it was a real pleasure
Thank you.
to hear your presentation. You are a very engaging speaker, and you have an ability to communicate very effectively to lay people, although all of us have spent many, many hours trying to understand village budgets and asking questions and making sense of them. Frankly, sometimes your work can come across as dry to someone, and I still consider myself a lay person. So I really appreciate you being able to clearly, express things so that we can follow along and really put it into context and understand how it all works together. And it is, of course, lovely to hear your affirmation of all of our very high regard we have for Tom and Dale and for the great work that their department does. So I'm pleased that you found that to be the case as well. It's a pleasure to have you on board. The reason, I don't know if people don't follow us every week, but we had a transition because the previous firm had some of their own issues going on, and we thought it best to reconsider if we might want to go with a firm that had a sterling reputation, and I trust that that's what we have now, because I hope that's the case. I really enjoyed hearing from you tonight, so thanks so much.
We do have a new peer review report, which I'll pass on to you, and that's obviously a pass by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, so we're happy that happened as well.
Doesn't get much more important than our accountant being on the up and up.
Yes, we get audited too.
Auditors being on the up and up. Thank you
It
very
stinks.
much. All right, thank you. Interim Manager Fraioli.
They're going to stay together for the next bullet item, which is a 2017. Well, Tom's going to take over. You're welcome to stay, Brendan. So Tom is going to segue from that into discussing some of the things that Trustee Codman mentioned, like doing some housekeeping and possibly spending some of that money with his 2017 year-to-date budget review. But before Tom starts his presentation, I'd like to echo some of the comments from the board about Tom's team. And this was all done reminding everybody in the midst of the never-ending Munis conversion. So that's really a Herculean effort, and that's all good stuff coming out of the finance department tonight. Tom?
You thought the glowing should continue longer?
I can go all day about you, Tom, but
Mayor, I thank you for mentioning my staff, and especially my Deputy Treasurer, Dale Ferreira. She really works hard, as you know, and everybody knows, and I couldn't do it without her and the rest of my staff that works hard to keep everybody paid and taking the money. So now that we've finished reviewing the 2016 financial statements and the audit, I did want to give a quick look at what's going on in 2017. This is something that we usually do. We usually wait for half the year to go by because, as we often find, most of our revenues are late showing up, and it also takes a while for the expenditures to make unusual trends, but at the same time the expenditures are generally predictable month to month. Most of our expenditures are payroll and employee benefits and contractual expenses, and also planned capital purchases as well. So I really don't have much to report on the expenditure side. The expenditures are well within the budget in 2017 to date. And actually, I'm going to talk about Munis because we have the new software up and running for 2017 now. And before, with our system, I'd have to define a report and export it. And it always came out as a PDF document. And then we had the ability to make it into an Excel document to try to do additional analysis work. But with Munis, I was just able to throw the report directly to Excel, and then I could easily sort it and make faster trends, such as right now, and actually it did seem kind of low. Our payroll through the first half of the year is actually 7 months, is at 54% of budget, which is a little bit low when you count the number of payrolls throughout the year. But that's generally attributable to some of the vacancies that we have throughout some of the departments. The overtime is only at 49% for the year, so that's a good trend. Although, as we see from experience, sometimes, like in the police department, because they're able to save up overtime as comp time to be used as comp time, and if you're not able to use it as comp time, then they have to, under the union contract, sell it by the end of the year. So oftentimes a lot of the overtime starts showing up, especially in the police department, late in the year. Our contractual expenses to date are at 44%. And I also looked hard at the workers' comp and the health insurance expenditures, because those are, as I always say, those are always the wild cards, and those are especially late in showing up. We have to keep our books open through March in order to look at all the workers' comp and the health insurance expenditures. But today we're at about 40% on each of those year to date. And that's consistent with what it's been in the past as well. So there's really nothing exciting going on with expenditures. And on the revenue side, I report to you every time we get a quarterly sales tax payment. We received 2 payments so far this year, and we're at about budget. It's about half of the amount expected to receive, the $3.65 million for the year. I did report the good news on the mortgage tax in June, after having stagnant mortgage tax revenues for many, many years. We actually received our first half payment in 2017 of $213,800, which is actually more than the $150,000 that we had budgeted for the entire year, which seemed to be a fairly good number in the past, although we've been averaging about $180,000 for quite a few years. We did have much higher mortgage tax revenues back in the early 2000s, and it's taken a long time for it to actually head up again in 2017. Also, the gross utilities tax and the franchise fee revenues are coming in as budgeted. The court fines are actually higher this year to date. We actually had a very good month. We get all the parking revenues that are generated within the village, as well as the local code revenues. And we had an intern in our office this summer, so I actually had him auditing the court reports to make sure that everything that the villages do is being received. But I was pleased to see the increased revenues being paid to the village over the course of 2017 so far. And then also we have the departmental revenues, which are coming in as predicted in 2017. So I really don't have too much to report, other than it's going to be another good year for the village, the way things are going. But it doesn't mean that I don't wish to talk to you tonight, because part of this process is also looking at our capital projects. Now that the audit's over, I wanted to present some housekeeping issues to the board, mostly in terms of closing some of our capital projects. We usually close the capital projects by resolution, and often it's a case of excess monies in the capital projects. I'm sorry, these have been sent out late in the day, but I want to make sure that everybody got a copy of it, because this is what's going to be coming through as resolutions in the coming weeks. The first 2 pages, front and back, are actually the capital projects that I wanted to close in 2017, and the excess amounts that exist, like, for instance, the community center sun deck. That's been a project that's been on the books for a long, long time. It finally got done and completed as part of the Kilbrook project, and we have about $1,578 to go back to the Indoor Parklands Trust Fund. Mentioned the Kilbrook sewer project. We're actually ready to actually close that project. There's almost $24,000 in that project, and the recommendation is to transfer the money to the debt service fund to help pay for some of the bond payments in the coming years. The fire apparatus project, which was to refurbish the rescue truck, there's just over $2,000 that should be transferred to the debt service fund to pay for the bonds. The DPW dump truck just needs to be closed. There's no balance left in that project. There's an old curb machines project with monies to be transferred to the debt service fund. Good news is that we finally got that $50,000 DASNY money that was for the Lower Main Secor streetscape project from 2013. And when it was, the grant was announced, we had already pretty much set up the funding for that project. So we had done some accounting work to actually transfer a like amount of residual equity money from that project and transfer it to the paving and sidewalks capital project for 2014, which seemed to be the prudent thing to do. But you know, because we didn't actually receive that DASNY monies until this past June, that project stayed open. The 2014 project stayed open. The 2015 project stayed open. So now we're ready to close these projects. There's really not much to do other than declaring those projects closed. And the 2015 street and sidewalk project just needs to be just had the capital project budget amended to equal the actual revenues that were received, so that everything zeroes out. There's no extra money in that project. It just needs to be declared closed, as well as balancing the budget. And then for the street resurfacing and sidewalk capital project for 2016, we'd actually received excess CHIPS monies in 2016 on that project. So we just wanted to modify that project budget to equal the amount of the additional CHIPS aid received. And that project is still open in part because of the delays on the Snowden Avenue project. So that's the one resolution to take care of those housekeeping issues. The second item has to do with a bond resolution that was adopted in 2017 in January for purchase of equipment, specifically after the board had adopted the bond resolution for the $465,000, there was corresponding resolutions adopted to establish capital projects for a street sweeper and for a backhoe. And due to the ability of the village to follow our procurement policy and buy this equipment under the cooperative purchase contracts, we're able to save a significant sum of money. And there's actually about $118,500 left in from this bond monies, and also as a result left over in these capital projects. But the capital projects were established to purchase a street sweeper and a backhoe, and we talked to bond counsel to find out what we could do with this money and what the process would be, because DPW asked if they could use this money to buy some trucks that would otherwise be submitted for the 2018 capital plan. So when we talked to bond counsel, he said the bond resolution was actually, worded when it said purchase of equipment, and the section of the local finance law that it referred to actually pertained to the it's actually called machinery and apparatus for construction and maintenance, and specifically includes trucks in that definition. So I actually had to agree with what the DPW wanted to do, that it was permissible to use that bond monies to purchase trucks. Our bond counsel just said that the action that the board needs to take would be to amend the capital project resolutions for the backhoe and the street sweeper to reduce the budget to equal the actual amount spent, and to adopt another resolution to establish the new capital project to authorize the purchase of trucks. So That was the request from DPW, and Paul's available if you have any questions on the proposal.
This is just such a weird night of increased revenue, decreased expenditures, and
This
I
never
feel like
hap- it
we're
never-
exceeding, we've been
never
exceedingly
happens. This never
conservative.
happens.
and
Everything always
If this
costs
could
more.
only be my household budget, I'd be a really happy woman. This is, I don't know, Paul, do you want to comment on what the vehicles are at least, and help us understand? I mean, it seems to make a lot of sense, what's being presented by Tom.
It's a smaller and medium-sized dump truck. Oops, sorry. The recommendations are for the purchase of a, what's commonly called a Mason dump truck, which you see kind of repeatedly, because we tried to replace all of those over the, probably the last 8 years. We've been systematically replacing those. We've been having a lot of success in our auction. In fact, we just received a, I think it's $18,000 plus or minus check for some of the stuff that we would typically have scrapped in the past. So, and that included a Mason dump, so we're looking to replace one of those, and one of our dump trucks, which we're looking to put in an auction next year. This would replace that one. So it's two vehicles that we would have came to you. We did come to you last year, which was taken out, and it would have been put to this year, and then this next one would have been next year in 18. So we're just looking to expend that money now, since it's already bonded. And
What's the unit cost for the dump trucks? Ballpark?
I actually
I
have
think-
those, that information.
yeah,
One of them is just less than $57,000, and the other one is a little bit more than $64,000.
and both of them are
One's a
fitted
Chevy 3300
35.
or 3500, and then there's also a Dodge Ram 5500.
Both of which will be fitted with plows and de-icing equipment and the like, typical of all our road
So is that the
vehicles.
is that the fully loaded? Well, I guess that stuff kind of, you throw it on the truck, right? You attach all that stuff.
A lot of it's aftermarket, but it's all aftermarket with
Do you need new plows
within the
and new
procurement.
spreaders and stuff like that to be added onto the trucks?
yes.
or-
Well, no, that's inclusive of that
Oh,
equipment.
okay.
These are actually
all baked
items
in.
that are like, listed as part of the New York State contract, and in fact, one of the contract expires in September, so they were actually looking to buy under the contract before the state, gives up selling vehicles under the contract and having to wait for the next contract to come out and take effect.
Yeah.
So you're suggesting that we should put this on for a resolution for September 6th to do,
September 6th, unless you wanted to do a resolution next week, if there was going to be a.
I mean, we're having a work session. We can start with
the work
a
session.
brief special session if there's value to
We-
doing it
we-
a week earlier, that'd
there-
be fine.
There is value. So I'll digress a little bit. The value is that we're going to ask that we open it up to public session, because we're going to have a recommendation of award. And you didn't talk about this in your mayor's announcements, but
Go
you
ahead.
can now. The money we received from Nita Lowy's office, the one point.
It's actually in the agenda, isn't it?
Is it on here?
Oh, originally it was in the agenda where we were talking about the water. That's,
Okay.
I'm not seeing here now.
Well, we opened up the bids for those today, and we have an apparent low bidder, which is just under 1 million. That bidder still has to get qualified, but to keep things on pace, we would like to. We are going to propose to award that at a meeting on the 30th, if we can open up in the public session at that point.
Sounds great.
So, if you wanted to talk
Well,
about the
The 1.4 million
1.4
from,
million.
yeah, so we heard from Nita Lowy's office that the EPA granted the funds that we applied for to help offset a significant amount of the expense for a major water main replacement project that's happening actually in the town. And wow, it sounds very dramatic. Thanks, Paul, and to Andy Teese, our water superintendent, for moving forward with that big grant application and working with our consultants to put forward a really worthy application, obviously, because this is a pretty sizable grant, and it will make a big difference. And every time we would talk about the water fund, I never want to miss the opportunity for anybody who's just tuning in now and doesn't understand how the water fund and the water system works, because it's a little different than how most of village government works. All of your property taxes go into the general fund, and that's most often what Tom is coming and talking to us about. But the Ossining water system provides water to over 30,000 people, everyone in the village of Ossining, everyone in the unincorporated town of Ossining. And when you pay your water bill, it goes into the water fund, and that water fund pays for all of the folks who work for the water department. They are village employees, and it is all of us on this board that are tasked with appropriating the funds from the Ossining Water Fund. But the money that goes into that fund, that's not your property taxes, that comes from how you pay your water bills. As far as the infrastructure is concerned, the reason why we in the village care about water main replacements in the town is because it's one unified system. The infrastructure is one system. It's the exact same water on Westerly Road as on Morningside Drive, and in Sparta as on Stormingtown Road. It's all one unified infrastructure system. The financial system's a little more complicated, and we'd love to have that be a little more unified, but that takes a lot of coordination with the other taxing entities, most notably the school, but also the town and the library. The county is similar to the village. There's, I won't get into that. But doing this big, major water main replacement project is a big deal, and thank you very much. I think part of what we've been focusing on with the water system is how can we tighten up the system, and we've done some significant demand management research, and we've done a lot of tightening up of the system and a lot of water main replacements. And this one, do you want to describe the project a little bit itself, where it's going to be happening?
The water main replacement that was open today, the public bids which were open today, is in the town on Gordon Avenue and on across the street that escapes me, and in the shoulder of Route 9. The Gordon Avenue component it came in a little less actually than we anticipated, so that money that the mayor referenced is going to offset even more than we originally anticipated. So that's a good thing should we qualify that apparent low bidder right now. And as I was discussing with Superintendent Teese earlier, a lot of the projects that we're going to start to bring in front of you with regard to the water main, because just to go back on the last 10 years, we've been doing a lot of lining. I think a lot of the projects we're going to start to get into now in the distribution system are going to be more along the lines of replacement, which this is. So it's a different type of work on the distribution system, but these are some of our older lines, or our more compromised lines that aren't really candidates for lining. So it's a little more pricey typically, but it's nice to, it's very timely to get that grant to offset this expenditure. If I can digress into one more thing, Tom, because you mentioned DASNY, we recently, thanks to the patience of our new friend Bonita and DASNY, we got an extension, and we met the extended deadline to change the original $100,000 grant for the fireboat some years ago. Has now been officially with DASNY converted to a $100,000 grant to offset the cost of our fire apparatus for independent hosts, and we're looking forward to receiving that money, because that's it's going to take some time, just like this one did. But as we go through the process, we are most certainly going to receive $100,000 to go against the debt service for the purchase of that apparatus.
Great. And maybe it won't take 3 years.
Yes, well, the Dormitory Authority is a very special organization within
Well,
the state of New York.
We are very fortunate, though, that we have good relationships with the folks who
do,
work in
we
both
do.
our Assemblywoman's office and our Senator's office who help us with that, and hopefully that'll just move a little more swiftly this time.
And I think Jerry Fiala has shown us through his work with the Sing Sing Prison Museum, he's made some good contacts to try to get some action quicker from the state agencies.
Oh, good, good. I know he spends an awful lot of time talking to those folks, so I'm glad it's working.
Okay, and I just have one final small budget modification. This was a budget modification that Paul had submitted where he had identified some excess monies within the general water and sewer funds to purchase a vehicle to replace a high mileage vehicle that will then be passed down. I believe it will ultimately end up in the building department where they generally get the older vehicles.
It'll trickle all the way down to our parks attendant, actually. You know, they'll get the building department will get the older vehicle. The building department will take one of their vehicles, kick it to recreation or someone else that does sporadic field work. But the most likely place would be the parks attendant, the fellow who goes around on the weekends. I think that's what the title is.
I think he's a ranger.
Ranger, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In total, between the general water and sewer funds, the budget modification there is $32,311 for the purchase of the vehicle.
Okay.
Sure.
So, will all of this be on next week, or just the middle one that we talked about?
The second and third ones could be on next week's. They've already been written. The housekeeping one, where I'm closing all those old capital projects, that I had intended to be on the September 6th board meeting agenda.
Okay.
Any further questions and comments for our friend Tom here?
Thank
All
you,
right.
Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
May I continue?
Please, Interim Manager Fraley.
Last item we have on the agenda this evening is an update by Trustee Levin and Trustee Bazemore on the Landlord-Tenant Relations Council.
Okay, thank you. So, quite a bit of work, progress being made. Stuart, sorry.
Oh.
I left you off the email, I didn't realize when I was in the call.
Don't worry.
So Corporation Counsel, Stuart Kahn's been amazingly helpful. He's been sitting in meetings with Quantel and I. Just want to give a little bookend, a little update, and then Trustee Bazemore is going to give you, we have come with 5 recommendations for the board to consider. I'm going to use Mark Twain's language, which is, you know, writing a novel is easy. A short story takes a long time. You're getting a short story because it's actually a very, each one of the recommendations is pretty significant, but we really tried to encapsulate it so that we can really have a good conversation about it. So I just wanted to go through a little bit of a reminder that we had, at the end of last year, talked about the purpose of the subcommittee, which the two of us have been involved in, and some of the things that have happened. We have, over time, have met with the current landlord-tenant council members, the remaining members, to get their input into some of our thoughts, our ideas, their thoughts. We have met with a group of landlords and landlord representatives. Again, always the 3 of us together, with Stuart taking copious notes, and had a lively conversation with those folks as well about their thoughts, their needs, their beliefs. Some of them remember the Landlord-Tenant Council, the original one, what it was said for. Really good information. We have looked at and interviewed some outside resources to help us. If you recall, last time we updated, we talked about a registry, we talked about leases, we talked about a whole bunch of things, but we talked about how to not burden the building department and various ideas that we have. And today we'll talk about the recommendation we're making, but we did research outside resources to alleviate the burden with so much of the work that needs to be done by the building department. We also researched other municipalities across the country with some of their code issues, their municipalities, and how they handle things like registries, leases, et cetera, et cetera. Do they have councils like this? Do they not? ETPA, et cetera. All of which has been done since we've last met. We didn't feel it necessary to do a 1-hour presentation with all these pieces because it's a working session. Any questions anybody has about the recommendations, I think we can get more information. We also, we looked at ETPA as part of this. I do want to remind everybody the chronology of all this, which is that at one point we had hired Jeff Smith when Lori Lee Dixon was with us. We wanted to hire an attorney that's involved in understanding some of the issues. He too, and we have a lot of written information from him, interviewed a whole bunch of different constituents in our village, and we knew we were getting a new attorney, but we also felt we couldn't burden a new attorney with that. We then moved everything over to Stewart. So I just wanted to remind everyone of sort of the chronology that went on. So we're going to move into, we have 5 recommendations, and I think I'm going the wrong way. I think Quantel is going to read, and I'll sort of bookend as we go through them.
All right. So the original charter for the council, with the exception of the makeup and the membership, the subcommittee is recommending that the board approves via resolution that the council will now be comprised of 9 members. There will be 3 landlord representatives, 3 village tenants, and 3 other co-op or condo residents/owners, non-real estate business owners. Additionally, we recommend a non-voting member to include the building department representative in Section 8. A board liaison should continue to be assigned, and corporation counsel should be included in the mix. We are ready to post these openings and request volunteers to fill the vacancies. I do want to speak to why we decided to go from 7 to 9 members, particularly as Rika had mentioned, Jeff Smith and his experience with the Westchester Rental Stabilization Board. He felt that 9 members would be a much fairer number, because it would seem like a lesser number, that there might be one side to try to sway the other. So to be a little more fair, a 9-member board would be a better breaking point. The second recommendation, we recommend clearly delineating subpoena powers so that the landlord-tenant council can better mediate cases brought before it by landlords and by tenants. This will need to be drafted by corporation counsel. The third recommendation is we recommend that the village approve a resolution which requires all tenants to have leases. We will believe that this would be helpful to tenants and fair and honest landlords. So we believe this will be helpful to tenants and fair and honest landlords.
So we looked at different municipal. Sorry,
Yes.
I'm actually reading what we wrote, so I knew you were done. The idea of leases is a big deal, and we really believe. Look, I'm a homeowner, and my information is out there, to the municipality. It's no different than home ownership. People who live here, people that own, people should know who they are. We should know who the owners are. We should know how to reach them, and the first responders need to know how to reach them. And I think that the leases help in that, and I think leases are, frankly, before I got involved in this, I just assumed everybody had leases, to be honest with you. I've rented in my life, and I always had a lease. My parents rented here in Ossining. They had leases. I think it protects tenants, and frankly, I think it protects landlords. And when we met with the landlords, we had this discussion, and I think Stuart can correct me if I'm reading it wrong, but they agreed that leases, if you're an honest landlord, leases are a good thing for you. They're actually helpful to you. So we're recommending that, and I don't remember if it's a resolution or not, but it's something that we would like to have instituted in this village.
And it's with regarding to tenants, of course, we know that leases help define what some of the expectations are, and we know that it was a big concern, particularly when we were having conversations with regarding ETPA and other matters of landlord-tenant disputes. Did you have anything to add?
The only thing I wanted to mention, Quantel, and thank you, is with regard to Section 8 tenancies, because this issue has come up.
Forgot to put that in.
From what I understand from my discussions with Marilyn, generally Section 8 tenants within Ossining will get a lease for their first year. and subsequent years, they do not get a new lease. There is one building in Ossining where, in fact, the landlord insists on renewal leases. But generally, the practice for Section 8 is you get an initial lease, and then the landlord simply advises both the tenant and the Section 8 office that the rent will be X, but the lease itself, in essence, continues. So there's a written lease for year one, but there aren't written leases for the subsequent years. So that would be the, the real only nuance in terms of written leases, is that the general practice in Section 8 is in renewal years, you don't see you don't have a brand new lease.
And just to put a caveat on that, it really, particularly for the Section 8 program,
Yes.
it's my experience has been is that certain landlords just require leases. Again, those who are, and particularly your larger companies, they have leases. It's not an and, if, or but. It's typically a year lease, and that's what it is. Some of the smaller ones, it'll just be a month to month, but there is still some type of understanding that this is what's being expected
By both parties.
by both parties. I will say that there was a conversation about the length of the lease. We just left that we just left that open. We didn't want to necessarily we didn't necessarily go down that road just yet.
Well, I mean, there are two issues with recommendations. We're a subcommittee, so this meeting is also to say, what the next steps are. But, this is a village manager-driven environment, and village management needs to, at this point, get more involved and make their recommendation based on staffing, based on, when it comes to leases, maybe there's an education factor that needs to be. But, our role, I think, the way we saw it, was to do the heavy lifting. Get sort of the big picture, get our point of view, eliminate. We originally had like 18 ideas, and eliminate ideas that we don't think are even approachable. Look at that, really things that are doable in year one, what it would take. But management needs to look at it and say, okay, this is where we can participate, this is where we might not, this is where we need the trustees more involved, less involved, and I think that's where we are right now. Otherwise, we never end. This never comes to any closure because you don't know where it ends. So this is where we've ended it, that at this point, is it a one-year lease for everybody? The people on the council might also have something to say about that, but if part of the charter is that you mediate issues, sure, a lot of them are going to be, the light's broken in the hall, whatever, but you need leases. How do you mediate without information? And leases can be downloaded on the web. This is not brain surgery, in this day and age. But there might be some education necessary. So these are details. We're trying to stay a little bit at 30,000 feet, not quite 50,000, but not at 10 feet from the ground, because management can start, I think, and we did talk about Stuart's been involved, but Paul was not as involved in it because we didn't ask you to be. You were amazingly busy. There are so many projects going on. And we just felt that at this point, after tonight, starts being, let's get management involved. And with a new village manager, I think the timing's actually perfect.
We're recommending a landlord registry for buildings with more than 2 units, which are not owner-occupied. We believe that this will help the LTC create a foundation, database as to who's living in the village, no different from the information we gather from home owners. We believe it's essential for this information. We believe this information is essential. In asking the board to approve this recommendation, we understand that the work involved on the behalf of village staff to collect and sort the database with cooperation and an expense to landlords. There may be a need to offset some costs with fees for inspections and for the registry, which we think should be analyzed and recommended by the village manager. Coupled with recommendation number 4.
I'm just going to stop. So this is like a hand glove. So I think it's ironic, frankly, that we sat down here today, and there's now another company. When we started this conversation a few months ago, we had to do a lot of research about this. There are definitely municipalities that do registry. They come in all shapes and sizes. When we met with the landlords, they for sure, at least one of them, I believe, if not more, were very familiar with this because even in Westchester, it's been approached. Their complaints are about fees, not about the idea of registry. Okay, so I want to be very clear that, and we took notes at these meetings, and I want to be clear that in principle, what you're hearing tonight was agreed to by both people who really represent more, I would say, the tenants and definite landlords. And the problem, the challenge, for some, not all, was about money. Was yet another fee villages will be, or municipalities, not really villages, because they sort of feel very negative about them taking on extra work and cost. And by the way, you know, we will too. The village will have to do a little bit more work than the two. So it's a cost-benefit thing. But to me, these are details that we work through. They're not obstacles. And if you agree in principle to a registry, the issue of cost, expenses, revenues is a discussion to be had at the village level with the treasurer and sit down and look at what we're looking at. And we did some research on this. And there are a number of case studies alive and well. Some are very close by Putnam. You know, we have a whole bunch of case studies that we can look at, examples. Stuart has looked at them. So I'm not worried about that. It's a matter of whether you agree in principle. We as a group agree in principle to a registry. I will go on record as saying that most of the landlords they just didn't like what the charges were and the fees that they were being charged, and the escalating fees in a few municipalities where they have other buildings. That is just another way to. I mean, I'm not going to use the exact words, but I'm on the video. But you know, it's just another way to make money, and that's not our goal. Our goal actually is for safe and fair housing, not another way to skim money into our budget. That is not the goal. And my suggestion, not in the recommendation, because we did not fully agree on it, and we only put what we fully agreed on, is then in the first year, don't charge anything. Make it like one of these programs for those that raise their hands and get into it. You know, there are no fees. After that, start some fees. But I think those discussions don't need to be done in this session. They need to sort of be thought about as to costs, benefits, and who's involved. So I just wanted to put it out there. That's why the recommendation doesn't include discussions about that. But verbally, I just wanted to say that in principle, there was agreement on this.
Coupled with recommendation 4, we recommend an outside experience resource that can create a database. How does this get accomplished? One of the ways that other municipalities have pursued the inspections and documentations of all rental dwellings. We've researched some companies, and we are recommending that the BOT consider CVR Associates as our outsourced solution. We would like the village manager and treasurer to review our proposal and create an appropriate financial due diligence on the behalf of the village. In short, we have every reason to believe that CVR can conduct the inspection on all rental and dwelling units in less than 1 year's time with a minimal use of the building department staff, and at all in costs of no more than $125,000 in year 1. There are a number of iterations that can lower this number, which need further analysis. I also wanted to speak to what the rental registration is. It's not only just a registration of finding out, you know, who's responsible, but the inspections come in because the particular document that we had Jeff Smith work on was a registration that came with a rental permit. So there's an expectation, as we've mentioned in earlier presentations about the housing quality standards, that each rental unit will, of course, be inspected to make sure that, you know, the windows are proper, that the stove works, that the sink works, because it's been our experience, and definitely from the testimony of ETPA and definitely from people who've been on the Landlord-Tenant Council, they've never really had something to work with. And the largest concerns that we are hearing from our community is just that we just have substandard landlords. And so what does that look like? And how do you get that information? So I do want to mention that the registration is not just a single form, a single piece of paper, but there is attached a rental permit, which will have certain guidelines that we expect people to adhere to make sure that there's quality housing here in the village.
So that's just a little bit different than I would have said it. To be fair, I would say it differently. I would say that there are, from my perspective, a lot of very above-board landlords in this community, and there are, especially I think in the larger buildings where they're run by management companies, etc. And I don't see any proof. I am not doing this whole process that we have a disproportionate number of bad landlords or substandard landlords. So I take a little exception with the wording. However, to have a landlord-tenant council that can judge anything or mediate anything, which is what this is about, they have to have a foundation and a base, and they have to have some sort of a minimal standard to look at. How does one make a decision whether the landlord is doing something right or wrong if there's no standards to go by? What are they supposed to use? Standards have to be created and agreed upon. This is a landlord-tenant council, so they will all need to agree that, like a running toilet is something, we're talking about minimal standards, we are not talking about maximum standards, frankly. I suspect that for the landlords to do exactly what they're supposed to do, this is a non-issue. I suspect for landlords who know that they're doing what they're not supposed to be doing, this is going to be a huge issue. But so what? I mean, there should be decent housing for people. We have a lot of rental dwellings in this community, and we can't expect, our job as a subcommittee is to establish and re-engineer the council. I don't know how, I'm not interested, frankly, in good landlords and bad landlords. I'm not interested in good tenants and bad tenants. I'm not on the council. I am interested as a trustee to give the council the tools and the wherewithal and the power to make decisions that the charter says they're supposed to make, which is to mediate. It's actually been in our charter since whatever, the 1970s. They can't do that without some standards set by us, in my opinion. And so for me, these recommendations are to set standards. We can have a whole conversation about this particular vendor. If people have other vendors they want us to consider. I will also say, Stuart, correct me if I'm wrong, that when we met with the landlords, they were familiar with this company.
Yes, they were.
And thought they were a good company.
They had nothing, yeah, those who were familiar with it had nothing negative to say about CVR.
So, but we're recommending, because we did research, that doesn't mean that this board has to say, let's go with this. This board can say, I want to look at another one. I'd like to look at a third one. We're not married to them. We just did our homework, and we're presenting our homework to everybody here. We have the write-up, we have the proposal, we have the timeline, and I didn't feel it was necessary today. Neither Quantel and I feel it was necessary. We can email it to you guys. We can have separate discussions. The village manager needs to be involved. Tom needs to be involved. But we did a ballpark figure. We sat around looking at the numbers. No more than 125. The levers are simple. You could do all the units that are rentals. They can. They looked at the total number of rental units and feel very comfortable they could do them all in 1 year without bothering our code enforcement folks, without bothering our building department. But we thought, why do you need to do inspections for building, and I think we discussed this last time, that are 5 years or younger? They're all new buildings, or Avalon, for example. You don't need to do them. Take those numbers right off the top. Take the numbers, of people, if you want to say that are being inspected as a part of our other inspections that are being done. Take those units out of it if you want to. Section 8 has its own inspection. Take those units out. Now you're talking, you just reduced it by about a third. So these are levers. Don't inspect every year, inspect every other, so you can move levers around to get the number to come to a very reasonable and fair number in our budget that I think is easy to work with. We did those numbers. We're not presenting them because, frankly, I'm not sure it's a trustee's job to sit here and do all the financial analysis. We have treasurer, we have a finance department, we have village manager, and they can look at different scenarios, and if they want to look at different vendors to make recommendations. We did one piece of homework, they could do more. But just to put it on the record that we did get a thumbs up for this particular one. I'm not cutting, Quantel and I decided that he was going to state the things, and I was, when nobody here is cutting anybody off, we decided on how to present it, and that's what we, and this is our presentation of 5, so that's it.
Elmo?
Subpoena power, did we do that one?
Yeah, we said that.
I'm sorry, okay. That was the first one we did, right?
Second.
Can I just see the list, because my numbers don't make sense, my 4 and 5. Thank you. John, maybe, questions, comments?
Sure.
Sure, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm not gonna comment in too much depth other than just to say that you've obviously put a lot of time into this and thought it through. I think a lot of things that you're talking about, and as you said, Rika, and pointed out, that in order for this committee to be effective, It needs the tools to be able to do the job and do it well, and have information that's meaningful in relationship to the job that they're doing. You know, the lease idea I think is, you know, I think as you say, you know, a lot of these things you think they already exist, but they don't. And I think at the end of the day, we want safe housing. We want both tenants and owners to have protections, to be able to have that transaction of tenant and you know, and landlord. So I think it's all good. We gotta peel it back a little bit. I think we need to decide financially what the village is going to commit to this, because it's not just a one-year thing. It's going to be an ongoing. It's going to be an ongoing financial commitment to a process, and I think we need to look at it the first year, and then we need to look at it 3 years and 5 years, and what we think it's going to cost for it to happen. And I frankly am in support of it. I think that this is an area where we need to get involved, and both tenants and landlords need to have a level playing field. So.
What time is it? Got some time.
Well, how much did we hit, we're given? I thought we actually hit the mark,
All
to
right,
be
so
honest
I
with
just
you.
have sort of, I guess, not a comment in regards to the presentation. I think we needed to see this. I think that's something essential, but I think the 5 items that were presented to us, or the recommendations that were presented to us, are great. It's just I wish I would have the opportunity to see them at hand, because usually that's what we try to put on the agenda. You know, we put information so we can have more of a conversation, so to speak. So I wish I could have seen that before, so I can prepare myself and be more ready for the questions that I may have. Now I just have to go back and probably ask you to send me all that information, if you don't mind. The other comment that I have is this whole presentation, and just for the people that, just to be clear, because it was mentioned, that word ETPA was mentioned several times into the presentation, and this is not an ETPA conversation. I think that was based on some of the regulations that ETPA or rent stabilization has of the guidelines for tenant protections. I think that's what you guys were basing on. So, but again, this conversation was not about ETPA. It was about protecting the tenants and landlords within our community. The other part that I think is essential for us to clarify, and please clarify this for me because I'm still a little confused, and we do have the tenant and landlord, but when you're talking about inspections and registrations for the inspections, at what level is that going to be? Is that going to be involved the units, like it was mentioned that you want the registration from 2 families and up? Is that inspection going to take place for the same units, or just for 6 families and up, or 3 families and up? How does that inspection works? Who's going to get that inspection done at this point? If we say, if the board agrees that those inspections are needed.
So, so a bunch of things. I know the debate about sending all the information, et cetera. You know, ideally what we'd like to start looking, our job as a subcommittee is not to solve all the issues. That's not really what a subcommittee, at least from our perspective. Our job is to research what the council should be using as tools. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we started looking at that, many discussions about it. For me personally, I don't really think a subcommittee setting up the council needs to discuss all that. I think each of these things are on their own. They're not interrelated to the extent that the first 2 can be put into resolution so we could establish a council and start getting people on the council. The others are more intricate. Financial analysis, maybe we need to look at more than one vendor. I don't even know by rule, given the amount of money, whether we need to look at 3, you know, all of these. We did some homework. We took it as far as we could. The number of units, I'm not sure that Quantel and I personally need to, we can make a recommendation, but I think each of these can be discussed as a separate issue. They're not all thoroughly interrelated.
That involves the money, how much you got a proposal for the inspections. Was that proposal based on what?
The proposal is based on a per unit, and I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Per unit on the total number of units, plus things like if they make appointments, and the person doesn't show up, they have to come back again. So there's a lesser cost, but still a cost. So I gave you the total. They did a certain number of units and an average cost per unit.
So you're talking about when they
So we did all the rental units,
including the two
we
families?
took all the rental units.
That's what I wanted.
And
Okay.
they said that, I'll tell you the amount. I don't know, if there's a bidding process, am I allowed to say the amount? I don't know if that's confidential or not.
I don't need to
Because
know
the
the amount, I
vendor,
just need
it's
to know
not
the.
fair to the vendor.
Why don't we
Let's just say X.
Yeah.
They provided us
They
with a,
provided X per unit for all the rental units.
Okay.
Right, Stuart?
that's exactly how they did a gross number and then a per unit number. That's right.
So to
Now-
answer your question, when we initially went out to figure out how much each inspection cost, we included two-family, non-occupied.
Okay.
Right.
So, and
Exactly.
I
We
think that's
included,
what we need
It's not that
to,
we're recommending, but we included.
okay, so, but that's, again, you guys come in with a recommendation of doing the inspections, and part of our job is to understand
Right.
that process. Because if we're gonna pass a law so the committee can enforce this, the laws that we pass, I need to understand, and I'm not sure if the rest of us need to understand, but at least I need to understand that we are gonna be doing a two-family registration, and the two families that are not owner occupied are gonna be getting the inspections on the same time. So I need to make sure that that is clear, because, again, before this process is started, my understanding of this committee was, they usually look at 3 families and up, or 6 families and up. It wasn't really a clear definition of what they were looking at. So, and if we're changing this, if we're clarifying this, I think we need to clarify that. Now, I originally brought into this board about 2 or 3 years ago, the registration. I pulled my recommendation at that time because, again, it was a financial thing, we didn't have enough personnel. So, if I'm gonna support this, which, again, I brought that piece of that many years ago, and I'm in support of that as a concept, but I think you're right, I think we need to have our village manager office and our building department look into this and see what does that mean. A couple of the items that, again, it's not a concern, but I think more of a, how do we, and I haven't spoken, I spoke to you about this, how do we get those reports, those inspections, if those inspections go through, how does that integrate with a building department? So I think that's essential, that, again, we don't need to look into that, but I think we need to have in mind that those reports need to be provided to our staff, so our staff be able to have access, a direct access to that. And since that is public information, that needs to be provided. So it's a whole group, I think, money-wise and management portion of our village manager's office needs to do our homework. So
Okay.
I would like to see what you have, and definitely the numbers that you have. I looked at the firm that you guys have referred to in regards to the inspections. I don't know them. I've seen the samples of the stuff that they have, But again, there's a process, so I would like to see, if, however, our corporation, recommends, and then how do we go out to bid and everything else in this process. But, I think, I would like to see what you guys have, maybe, in concept, some of the points, I definitely agree. I think we should, definitely put that in process 1 and 2, the members, definitely we need to have the bodies to have them give us more feedback and.
So I'm gonna recap what I'm hearing you say, because I took my little notes. The number, the membership and involvement, you're good with?
Yes.
Okay. The subpoena power thing, which we
Yes.
discussed, you're good with? The written leases?
Yeah.
You're good with?
Of course.
And you might want a little more detail, but you're good
Correct.
with, okay. What you're asking for more information?
I'm sorry, and I would like to see if other municipalities have the same, you said you did some.
We have some
Okay.
municipalities with leases, they're all a little bit different,
Okay.
but yeah.
Correct.
All right, so but I just would like to see the
I
municipalities.
can provide that to you.
Thank you.
So now we're down to registry and the numbers, right, like the units, and we're to how one does inspections, which is hand in glove, in order to determine, I mean, those are the missing pieces.
Yeah.
So it's always, we're not really doing presentation, we're doing an update. So we'll meet with the village manager, because that person's gonna have the same questions, and we'll put a more detailed against the last two, number 4 and 5, because 1, 2, and 3, I'm seeing, well, Victoria, you haven't spoken yet, but you did, no, I'm just recap, I wanna make sure I'm hearing you correctly, with the more detail about the numbers, because we're gonna need different iterations. The whole idea, though, here, which is what you had said last time, is that it's 100% clear to us that we cannot burden the building department, okay? And it is 100% clear to us that everything has to be done online, multilingual, publicly available, and easy to access to it, without our staff being burdened with doing it, which is why we're seeking out. And that is what this company does. And it does it in Westchester. It has all of that. So we can either bring them in and have them present. First, though, we have to be clear that we didn't violate some bidding process piece before we can do that, however. Because once they give their prices, it's not fair because, that kind of thing. So we're in a little bit of a chicken and egg, but am I recapping your concerns?
Yes. And again,
Okay,
it's
so
not a
that's-
concern about number of units, because I think if we are gonna be doing the register,
Yeah.
they should comply with everything that else. To me, is more, because last time when I brought the register in front of the board as a proposal, I got a bunch of emails and I got stopped by, why do we have to pay for this? Why do we have to pay for this application? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? So to me, it's like, I need to understand that and how we gonna staff ourselves to accommodate all this stuff, and what does that mean as a general?
That's why we're trying to
So
do
that's-
the total subcontracting, because
So-
that price includes the whole package, and that's how they work. So I think I'm hearing, I think I've recapped, yes, your concerns, yeah. And I thought John went already, did you not finish your?
You're all good? Got your questions asked?
I think, like I said, this is all important stuff, and certainly the first 3 items, yeah, I think that's important, and obviously the devil's in the details and like the last two,
Sure.
and the last 2 items, 4 and 5, and I think once we get our arms around administrative efforts and what it's gonna take to get it done, then we move forward, so.
So then, Stuart, I'd like to ask you, process numbers 1 and 2, which are really, how do we amend the charter to expand the membership and clearly state what those other three folks are, and then granting them the subpoena power. And I gather from what's being presented that if we made those 2 modifications to the charter, you feel that the committee, as it would be constituted at that point, would have the tools that it needs to be able to be more effective. If this other stuff were in place, but as far as what needs to change with the charter, that would be all the changes that you're suggesting are necessary in the charter.
If that's what you guys are all willing to sort of agree to, we're gonna take number 1 and 2 and move
I
forward
mean,
with
for
that,
now,
yeah.
that's.
What I'm asking though is, as far as changes to the way that we have designated the powers of this group, whether they have all of the information they need to really be able to do it is not charter related. But the only charter recommendations, changes you're recommending are the membership numbers and giving them subpoena power. So changing the charter, that's a process. What's the timeline are we talking about there? 2 months? At least?
It potentially, but need not be. I mean, we can have we'd have to call a public hearing. It would be a revision to the code with regard to the current landlord-tenant council. And then it would be presented after a public hearing, that presumably the public would come out, whatever. And then 2 weeks after that, the board could vote on it. I mean, conceivably a public, once I work out what it would look like and present it to you folks at a work session, and we could go through that, then we could call for the public hearing after we have somewhat of an idea what the language is. But it's a matter of just, changing the number of members, adding building department members. There was some discussion about potentially having membership, which might, at least from the 3 members, to be outside of just necessarily the village. There were different ways to talk about that. But that can be done. And as to the subpoena power, there are many ordinances in which committees are given subpoena power, so that's just a matter of grafting that in. You know, I would think that probably for one of our September work sessions, either the 13th or the 27th, I could have, you know, a
Great.
proposal in terms of legislation for you folks that we could discuss at that point as
Great.
relates to, you know, items 1 and 2.
Great. Then, when it comes to requiring a lease, wouldn't we need to pass a local law to do that? What would be the mechanism for requiring
yes.
it?
That requirement, that if we were to say that within the village of Ossining, there must be written leases, and let's not talk about you know, length of lease, but a written lease, that would have to be that would have to be part of our ordinance, and we'd have to write a local law would fit into, you know, one of our sections within the code. We don't have that at all now, so unlike just a revision to the landlord-tenant, it would require, you know, something to be added in. Again, it would go through the same legislative process, but it would have to, you know, go there and you know, be looked at and reviewed and by you. And I suspect that there'll be, on a public comments, there may be more comments on that than there might be in terms of what our makeup of, you know, the potential
sure.
LTC is. But again, it would follow the same process.
Yeah, I'll be interested in that conversation, and we can expand upon it there, but I'll tell you, my inclination is, if we're going to pass a law to require a lease, and you think that that's a law that can be passed, it's consistent, it's not going to be overturned because there've been similar laws that have been problems elsewhere, you think this is...
What I can tell you is that there are a few municipalities, and I downloaded them, that have it. I have not seen a court that has said you cannot require a written lease. So
Great.
I think that's where we are with that.
Great.
Sorry. So if we pass a law, that means any rental unit within the village of Ossining will have to have a written lease.
That's what the law
Well,
says.
you can always carve out what your size is. So in other words, if you
Say
want it
100
to be...
units or more need to have a
If you
lease.
want it to be 6 units or greater, or 2 units owner-occupied or greater, you can carve that out in terms of, so that there could be certain units that are not fall within that. But the answer is that, you know, you can write it in such a way that, what you don't want to do is write it so that there's essentially just one landlord who's going to be required to do that. But as long as you have you know, across a spectrum of certain types of units, you could do that.
And when we could determine what sort of things should be included in the lease.
Right. You know, the standard legal forms are what are called Blumberg forms, and so the standard lease is a Blumberg lease, but it doesn't have what we're talking about are many things that you might see in a housing quality standards type inspection, in terms of it's got to be painted at a particular you know, number of years. There's things like that. Those things can be there, and you know, the leases have to have this. And again, this board may say, well, that should only apply to certain type, you know, certain units and higher. But I would think that you'd want that. Simply saying you have to have a lease doesn't go
Right.
to the extent that you need, because you want to have it, again, so that if you're going to have a landlord-tenant council, they will have a document that they can then, you know, utilize.
Okay, okay. We don't need to belabor the details of it,
Sure.
but part of it is to provide people with stability, so I don't know
Correct.
why we'd bother doing it for less than 1 year if, you know, a
Right.
month-to-month lease is not a lease as far as I'm concerned. But, and then I think I've been the most vocally opposed to a landlord registry when it's been raised in the past. Because it seemed to me to be incredibly onerous if we assume that most landlords are doing what they're supposed to do. And the way that it was presented previously was that the primary motivation for it was that the village needed to be able to communicate and communicate with and contact the actual person who owns the building, because if there's a violation, we need to know who to get, you know, who the violation goes to, and to be able to follow through with it and have some enforcement. But this is very different that's being presented, so I'm being more open to the idea. and I said to you and to you, trustees Bazemore and Quesada, months ago, because the two of you tend to not always agree on things, but if you could both be supportive of this concept, that I would be open to the idea. So I'm being open to the idea. And particularly if it can be coupled with some real substantial information that's going to be helpful to ensuring a higher quality of housing in the community. I'm interested to see how it might work out. One of the biggest stumbling blocks that we see is the cost, and I'm interested in understanding when we look at this more deeply. There was a suggestion that for the first year, the village might sort of absorb the cost and see this as sort of the seed money that we're using to start up this program to, and any landlords that jump on board right away and take advantage of it will be able to benefit from that. Was that my understanding? That was one of the suggestions as a possibility?
We have to put it more in writing. My personal, this is not a team agreement, I think. My personal belief is a philosophy of business is you reward those who do really good stuff and step up to the plate first, and you punish those who behave badly. And so those who volunteer and say, I got nothing to work, I'm already doing this. And some of the landlords said, this is nothing. I mean, are you kidding? We do this already. This is a no-brainer for us. I want to make it really easy for people to raise their hand and say, I'd like to be online. As it progresses, those people, we always talk about how do you enforce things. I'm a big 80-20 rule person. The last 20% who are going to give us a hard time and don't want to do it, I think after year one, you start charging. So if you didn't jump on board and if you didn't step up and if you didn't participate, because, here's the thing. 2 people have been sitting around with a attorney looking at this. Nobody has stopped anybody that we met with. The landlords, was it 5 people? I have it in here, but I just don't remember if it was 5 of them, 6.
We had four landlords plus one council, four
Who
groups of
represents
landlords.
5, and 3 other people. All of them were told, send us emails with suggestions. You're going to be told the same thing. We may not all be able to be in the room together because 3 of us equals vote, but nothing stops anybody here from saying this is the way I'd like to see it. I've looked at this in the past. We're looking for you to give us input after this meeting because I think we're at a point now where it's time for us to sort of move it forward. I even said to Quantel right before the meeting started, when does the subcommittee end being when do we accomplish whatever the heck it is that we want? I don't know when the subcommittee is supposed to stop, actually. It's sort of hard for me to figure that out. But we're at a point where we're very happy to have the village management get involved and say, well, this is our opinion. It's going to cost X. How are you going to cover that? Well, here are 5 ideas. If you've looked into it, send an email, and let us know if you think it should be this units or that units. Because really, there's just 2 of us looking at it, and there are many different ways of looking at this thing. So just send an email and let us know what you think it should be. But right now, I'm a big believer that year one, it should be very encouraging to people. The money should not be the thing. Fair and safe housing, especially with the issues around first responders, is what we're looking for. We're looking for a council where the court system will actually say, now that there is a council with some powers and a foundation and tools and support, if you have a problem, go to them. You don't have to always come with lawyers, and it's a more equitable system to go to a council. Remember, that was a part of the conversation. So I just think our job is to bring this forward. 3 units, 4 units, 6 units. Frankly, I don't know if the 2 of us should be the only ones now, at this point, now that we brought this to this line. So, I'm sure we'll be getting some emails.
Before I just say thank you and we kind of move on, I do want to clarify my understanding, because the inspections that are being proposed potentially with this outside firm, which is sort of the quality of housing inspections, that's a different checklist. It's a different approach than code enforcement inspections.
Oh, yeah.
But you did make reference to we can determine
We can modify that inspection.
and how many of the inspections we would want the outside firm to do, and to not be redundant, if we're doing 3 units or above fire inspections, how similar are they? And
Yeah,
Correct.
I don't
this
want
we,
the
yeah,
same.
Yes.
yeah.
yeah.
So-
This we actually spend many hours
I'm
on.
sure.
So there was a large conversation that we had a couple of months ago where we actually spoke to CVR. CVR not only works in New York but works all throughout the country, and so therefore there are times when municipalities have custom made what the inspection should be, because not only do you have to adhere to your local HUD standards, housing quality standards, but you have to adhere to the local municipality. So there is a opportunity to modify,
Right.
so there won't be a redundant inspection.
So it's a checklist.
Yep.
So we could take a checklist and say, gee, this is what Section 8 does, this is what the code enforcement folks do. They don't give you a template. They can, but you could start and say, here's a checklist of 10 things that equals, I'm oversimplifying, but basically, this is when we start moving to the next steps, to the detail stuff, and we should approve what the inspections are, because they should be the same for everybody. You know, toilet runs correctly, whatever, the 10 things, the 15 things. There isn't a mandated, I don't think, legal list for this, because
No,
this is
but-
not
but
a
Section
Section 8
right.
thing.
And a couple of things. One of the things that goes to what Trustee Cazada was asking, the idea is that these inspections would be done by an outside vendor. If the outside vendor first of all, the outside vendor would be providing their reports to the village.
Correct.
There'd be a separate portal through which the village could obtain that, the building department, for example.
Right.
If a code violation were observed, the vendor cannot write that OTR. They would communicate that information to the building department, which would then send a code enforcement officer to the location, conduct the inspection, and issue, if necessary, the OTR. But you're right, Mayor, as you point out, if we're doing fire inspections, which are, I should point out, they're different than the quality inspections. But to the extent that there is overlap, we can, what this company said is they can tailor the type of inspections that we want. So it's, we can sort of say, we'd like this done, we'd like it done this way. You know, one of the things that we discussed with them is the ability to essentially have someone almost on a 24/7 call ability, so that we could have communication. They do have folks who speak Spanish. They do communicate with the tenant to say that they're coming to the particular location, as well as to the managing agent. So, but the effort would be to avoid the overlap for the building department, and that the building department would get involved if it's not doing its regular inspection, only if in fact a code violation were observed, so that they could then go in and, if necessary, write the OTR and then follow that up with an appearance ticket.
Okay. I think that we're gonna, as far as, you know, one of the things you were talking about is, when does the subcommittee's role end? I mean, I think it's nearing, because you've done an awful lot of work, and I think this is what you were working on, was to come to us with not the 400 things that you considered and explored for the last 10 months or whatever.
It's been a minute.
But the 5 recommendations, which are really quite clear, and it's really sort of 3 different paths that we're looking at. The first 2 being changing the charter for the, you know, composition and powers a little bit of the Landlord-Tenant Relations Council, the requiring of a lease as a law, and exactly what that would look like. And it sounds like, Stuart, you were saying that in the next few weeks, sometime in September, we could be looking at proposed modifications to the charter addressing the composition and the subpoena powers.
Yes, and I think after that, then we can look at the, you know, the lease issue and things like that. But certainly, initially, I would be able to, at one of the September work sessions, have it for the Landlord-Tenant Council part of it, subpoena powers, membership, and things like that, absolutely.
And then if, let's say, that'll take a couple of months from that point before that's fully in place, but we could be starting to reach out to community members, because it'll be clear what we'd be looking for.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then the requiring of a lease would be sort of the next phase, which would be another law that we could be considering, and there's a lot of considerations on exactly what that would include. So that's
Right,
gonna be
because
more than a
there's a lot of
simple
pieces.
conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, there are a lot of pieces to each of those.
And then the landlord registry, and then working with an outside group is a whole nother level of complexity. And by the way, Debbie knew that we were discussing this tonight. She knows that it's related to our much larger discussions about how can we achieve our goals for safe, affordable housing in our community. So I imagine she'll be up to date by the time we get to sit with her next week. And she was interested in what your recommendations would be. So when you do email us any material from this, obviously, she'll be eager to take a look at it and offer her feedback. And so I want to say thank you very much to all
I just
three
want
of
to ask
you.
one more question, which
Sure.
is, would it make sense to meet the vendor at this point? Because she's setting up the meeting, or should we wait on
No,
that?
well, in fact,
Your
Paul and I were
thoughts?
discussing that. It would be professional services, so we're not in a situation where it's a bid sit.
Sure,
So we, if we want to make arrangements at some point to have the folks in here to make their presentation, I don't see a reason why not to do that.
So we should just think, I'd like to just, I don't need to do it this minute, but just think about when it makes sense to do that and what part of this. It was enlightening to speak with them about what they're doing in other parts of the country, frankly, for others. It was just like a nice piece of learning, frankly, about this, beyond what we need. So, thank you.
So thank you very much for learning what is going on in other parts of the country and other parts of New York, because we're obviously not the only community that has thousands of rental units and cares about the quality and safety of the housing that's provided in our community. So I'm very interested in seeing how much of this we can make effective, and what of these, how implementing these are really going to help us achieve those goals. Thank you very much, and I look forward to this subcommittee turning back into now just a board discussion and actually making things happen. Interim Manager Fraley.
That was the last agenda item, so we'll ask
right.
that we go into executive session.
For discussions of personnel related to specific persons and matters related to real property.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and with that, we say thank you very much for joining us for this very busy and interesting evening. We look forward to seeing you next week. We will be enjoying our 5th Wednesday of the month together, although we did take the 3rd Wednesday of the month off, so it's still only our 4th meeting. And we'll be back here at Village Hall for a work session. It sounds like we'll be opening up with a legislative session to address some of the material that we discussed with Tom earlier. This meeting is now adjourned. Oh, and Paul. Interim Manager Fraley, thank you very much. I believe this is probably your last meeting as interim manager sitting in that seat. It's been a real pleasure and an honor to work with you in this capacity.
Thank you.
This meeting is adjourned to executive session.